I believe I am, in fact, live. Yes, so I am. Alright then. Hello, good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, or good whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to Republic News with Liviana. I am your hostess, Liviana. Tonight's episode is the 6th episode of my Precinct show. The title of the episode is JM/ARC. You can Google around and see if you can figure out what that means. Because I don't really like to talk about the things that I name my live streams. The whole point is to encourage you to do some research. But anyway, I never actually talk about the things that I name my live streams. But anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I see we have a couple of people in the live chat. So hello, whoever's out there. We'll be checking in to the chat periodically to see if anyone has anything to say. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So my first story for this evening is an article that comes to me by way of Newsweek. Yes. And the article is, let's see. It is called Arizona Republicans Pose as Communists to Make Illegal Donation. Ow. To make illegal donation to, well, now, come on. To make illegal donation to Democrat Congressman Tom O'Halloran's campaign. Now, this is an article from the 15th, so that was this Monday. And I have heard about this before. I don't think this is really all that new news. Oh, I'm sorry, right? It's from the 12th. But I do think it was a little older than this, because I do believe I've heard of it before, just very recently. Anyway, so the article is by Ewan Palmer, and it says, 2 men affiliated with the Arizona Republican Party allegedly attempted to make a campaign donation to a Democratic congressman while posing as communists in an apparent sting attempt. The men believed to be members of the Northern Arizona University Republicans attempted to give $39.68 to the campaign office of Democrat Tom O'Halloran while desperately seeking a receipt for the money for the Northern Arizona University Communist Party, reports The Guardian. The pair are alleged to have wanted to make a donation in the name of the Communist Party in order to smear the Democrat by associating him with the far left. The men used the aliases Jose Rosales and Ahmad Sadia while attempting to make the donation. When they were informed that they would only get an emailed receipt for the donation, Rosales scratched out one email and wrote another in while filling out the required paperwork. After becoming suspicious of the pair, O'Halloran's campaign team then posted a video of Lindsey Coleman, the finance director for the campaign, returning the cash to the Arizona Republican Party headquarters in person. Let's see. So Coleman said as she arrived at the front desk, quote, "I am here because 2 young gentlemen made this contribution to our campaign," end quote. At this point, the man who allegedly called himself Rosales came out from behind a door with another man behind the desk, informing Coleman that his real name is Oscar. Coleman, who appears to recognize Oscar, then described how Oscar gave the donation under the name of Jose, which I might also add is illegal to falsify contribution information, end quote. Coleman adds she will, quote, probably report this to the police, end quote. Quote, "Oscar, I have your cash and I would like to return it to you, please." End quote. Coleman then shouts, prompting Oscar to return once more from behind the door. She continues, quote, "I'm returning the funds which you've just made to our campaign under the name Jose Rosales, claiming to be with NAU Young Communists when in fact you are with the NAU Young Republicans and your name is Oscar. Thank you for your support, but we cannot accept your funds." End quote. The man named Oscar did not dispute the claims from Coleman, even wishing her a great day as she leaves. The Arizona Republican Party did not immediately return a request for comment. So, I'm going to make a little comment on this myself. It's a very interesting example of bifurcation fallacy that we have in the United States, with Republicans constantly attempting to paint the Democratic Party as communists and commies and pinkos and socialists. The Democratic Party is not now and never has been a leftist political party. It started out as the party of the landed gentry, then rather quickly mutated to also include the merchants in the towns. And for most of its history, it was a relatively right-wing party associated with small business, whereas the Republicans from their inception have been associated with large business, big business. You can go back to 1860 and look at the tariff laws they were promoting. These are things that benefit industrialists and harm the poor and rural agrarian communities and so forth. So the Democrats had a sort of agrarian and a small business venue, if you will, at first, and eventually became a sort of in 1933, when FDR was elected, or took office after having been elected the previous year, 1932. That was the only time that the Democrats have ever put anyone in office remotely close to leftist, and FDR himself was merely a slightly left-tinged centrist. The introduction of the New Deal program under Roosevelt was done primarily in order to save capitalism from what was likely to happen if something wasn't done, which would have been the same sort of revolution that had occurred a few years earlier in Russia in 1918. Where the workers would have risen up and overthrown the industrialists and so forth. The Communist Party in the United States, the Socialist Party, those were both very popular in the 1930s. There was, as I think I've mentioned before, there was a school located in a town about 35 miles from where I live at the moment, which was referred to in various history documents I've read as a communist training school. When in reality, from what I've been able to discern, it was some kind of college that taught ideas based on socialist and Marxist ideas. Now, again, as I've pointed out many times, Marxism is only one kind of socialism, and arguably it's not even a kind of socialism, because it only sees socialism as a means to an end, that end being Marxist communism. Now, there are more than one kind of communism as well. Marxist communism is that state or situation, society, which is envisioned by Marxists as their ideal society, which is a classless and stateless society. This is one of the reasons you will hear Marxists in particular, and other leftists, socialists at times, pointing out that communism has never actually been, there's never been a communist nation. It's never actually been tried. Because if there were a communist nation, it would be stateless, and every place that people accuse of having been a communist nation has been a nation with a rather strong state. In fact, in some cases, the state has been described as all-powerful, which is, stretching things a little bit. Yeah. In the Soviet Union under Stalin, for example, had an extremely powerful state. It may very well be the definition of a statist nation. Anyway, the Democrats have been portrayed as leftist by the Republicans for a very long time, and in reality, they've been centrist from about the time of FDR until, well, we could argue over when exactly they started moving to the right, but by 1989, the beginning of 1989, with the Democrats having consistently lost throughout the 80s, the ideas of a man named Tony Coelho, who was promoting neoliberalism, which is what Reagan and Bush had been doing, an extreme right-wing economic perspective, began to be given some audience in the Democratic Party. And in 1992, when Bill Clinton was elected and subsequently became president in 93, the establishment of the Democratic Party was absolutely neoliberal, which again is an extreme right-wing economic perspective. The Democrats have never been leftist. The closest they ever came was when FDR was president, and they didn't really always go along with everything FDR wanted to do. For example, his first vice president was a Southern Democrat, and the Southern Democrats at the time were very conservative and typically right-wing. I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but anyway, he was FDR's vice president for FDR's first 2 terms as president. Shortly after, I guess maybe a couple of years after Roosevelt won his second term, this vice president broke with Roosevelt completely because he didn't support the New Deal. So in 1940, when Roosevelt was running for his third term, he wanted to name Henry Wallace, who had previously been his Secretary of Agriculture. Now, Henry Wallace was a progressive Republican when he was first appointed to this office, Secretary of Agriculture, and he didn't become a Democrat until, I believe it was 1936. So, at that point in time, Roosevelt began to consider him more likely as an ally. I will say Wallace had supported the New Deal from its inception. So FDR wanted to have Henry Wallace be his vice presidential running mate in 1940. The Democratic Party establishment did not want that at all. Roosevelt then threatened that he would not run for re-election unless he got Wallace as his running mate, so the party establishment relented, backed down, and Wallace became FDR's second vice president. In 1944, when FDR was running for his fourth term, he was too weakened by his illness to put up much of a fight against the party establishment, and they successfully had him replace Henry Wallace with Harry Truman. To spite them, however, FDR named Wallace his Secretary of Commerce, in which position he continued until Truman fired him in 1946. And he was Secretary of Commerce under Truman for a while, but Truman did fire him in 1946. At that point, Wallace became the editor-in-chief of the New Republic, a magazine founded in 1913 by the historical progressives. And Wallace himself, as I have already pointed out, was a progressive Republican before he became a progressive Democrat. from the time he took over at the New Republic, he used the platform of the New Republic to criticize Truman relentlessly, especially concerning Truman's foreign policy and the Cold War. Wallace was a very strong believer in peace and wanted to not pursue this sort of Cold War relationship with the Soviet Union. Now, Wallace had also been to the Soviet Union during some earlier point in time when he was in the cabinet. I don't know if it were when he was the vice president or when he was Secretary of Agriculture, but he did get to go to the Soviet Union, and he was shown a very sanitized view of conditions there. Among other things, he was shown Gulag camp, which was very nice and clean, and everybody there that was supposedly an inmate was happy and cheerful, and it wasn't until much later that he learned he had been misled. But at any rate, the idea that the Democratic Party is now or has ever been leftist is nothing but political partisan rhetoric. It's not remotely true. The Democrats, especially the party establishment, since 1993 at the latest, has been neoliberal. And again, neoliberalism is an extreme right-wing economic perspective. Left, center, and right refer to economics and not ideas about social justice or outrage culture or victim narratives. None of that stuff. That's not leftist. We can go into that, and I have gone into that in some detail in videos that I've done on this channel. For example, you can see the video I did earlier this year titled I think it was called Solidarity versus Intersectionality. That's a good example for you to go and check out later if you'd like to learn more about this. So, the idea that the Democrats are leftist, again, is nonsense. They are absolutely not. In fact, they are so much like the Republicans of today that there's no real practical point in attempting to distinguish between the two. Again, the idea that they were going to pull a gotcha, the Republican kids at this university were going to pull a gotcha on the Democratic Congress candidate is rather amusing. Democrats don't, communists don't really like Democrats, and Democrats don't really like communists. Hell, Democrats don't even like socialists. They're not even fond of social democracy anymore, and social democracy is a centrist economic position. It is sometimes slightly left-tinged, sometimes slightly right-tinged, but always right around the center. You could say leaning left or leaning right, but basically centrist. And what it is what you have in the Scandinavian countries. It is a mixed economy with some elements of capitalism and some elements of socialism. The elements of socialism in question are social safety net, welfare state, that kind of thing. That's what a social democracy is. So, yes, FDR was a social democrat. And he was slightly left-tinged because he did come up with the idea of a second Bill of Rights, which was largely about economic rights, and suggested such things as a right to universal health care. Something for which progressives have been fighting for over 100 years. So let the Democrats keep claiming that this is a great new idea. Yeah, it ain't new. In Teddy Roosevelt's first Progressive Party platform, 1912, there was a mention of a national health care service. In the 1948 Progressive Party platform, when Henry Wallace was running for president on the Progressive Party ticket, it specifically referred to a national health care insurance system. And of course, we have sort of evolved from there to talking about a national improved and expanded Medicare for all program, which would be not socialized medicine or socialized healthcare, as the Republicans keep trying to scare everyone into believing, because healthcare would still be independent. You get to be a doctor, you get to be paid, blah blah blah. But what would instead happen would be nationalized insurance, nationalized healthcare insurance. Because right now you have private for-profit insurance companies. They're not really interested in taking care of your healthcare. They make their money by charging you for your policy. And into this pool you pay, and supposedly out of the pool come payments for claims. So they make their money by denying your claims or paying only part of the claims, and then the money is used to further enrich the investors, the stockholders, and the executives. And if you have any doubt of that, just look into that for yourself. Look into the salaries of the CEOs of these various private for-profit insurance companies. Look into how little they actually pay out. Look into how often they refuse a claim, and so forth. But anyway, the point of, for example, H.R. 676, a bill in the House of Representatives known as the National Improved and Expanded Medicare for All Act, the point is to have a national health care insurance program based on the Medicare program, and to consolidate all of the various current government health care spending programs, including the VA and Medicare and Medicaid, into one, and getting rid of the private for-profit insurance companies. And the reason that you have to get rid of those is because every time the public option, as they call it, has been tried, where you have a government program alongside the private for-profit insurance programs, it fails. And the reason for that is because people, quite frankly, assume that if they pay someone directly out of their pocket that they're going to get better care, and that doesn't actually happen. But this is the kind of propaganda that gets spread about constantly. Anyway, so yeah, it's H.R. 676, for example, does not put government bureaucrats in charge of any kind of death panels. In fact, we have death panels now, which are private for-profit insurance companies deciding not to pay for your health care. But instead, what we would have under H.R. 676 would be regional boards of governors for the nationalized insurance system. And those people would be healthcare professionals, not government bureaucrats. So there's that. Anyway, I'm getting off the topic of the news considerably at this point, but the point that I wanted to make about this is that it is absolutely ridiculous to think that the Democrats are in any way akin to communists or even socialists of other types. But this is par for the course with the so-called dichotomy in our society. Is a false dilemma, a bifurcation fallacy, where we're presented with choices like Coke or Pepsi. Like, really? There's no such thing as RC. There's no such thing as Shasta Cola. There's no any other kind of cola. They're just Coke and Pepsi. The cola wars of the 1980s, for those of you old enough to remember. What about Jesus versus Satan, or God versus atheism? These are also examples of, neoliberals are those who espouse the economic theory, and neoconservatives, as the term is used today, the original neoconservatives in the mid-70s started out with a number of different ideas. One of those was economic, but their primary concern has always been foreign policy, and as the term is used today, it refers pretty much exclusively to foreign policy. And it does have some economic aspects to it, but in reality, Democratic neoliberals and Republican neoliberals and Republican neoconservatives and Democratic neoconservatives, they're the same thing. They do the exact same thing. It doesn't matter whether they have a D or an R next to their name. They all support neoliberalism as an economic policy and neoconservatism as a foreign policy. And there are a few exceptions. For example, there is still a libertarian wing of the Republican Party. So you have, for example, Rand Paul, who is opposed to some of the neoliberal economic practices like giving subsidies to various corporations, bailing out the banks, that sort of thing. He's also, as a follower of the objectivist idea. I don't want to dignify it with the name philosophy because I've gone into this before as well. But anyway, as a follower of the objectivist perspective, he doesn't want, he embraces the so-called non-aggression principle, and so doesn't want a lot of foreign entanglements and a lot of spending on the military and so forth. So in reality, whenever people talk about neoliberals and neoconservatives in 2018, they're not actually talking about any difference, really. I mean, the two ideas are rather inconsistent, but most of the elected officials are too stupid to know that. Neoliberalism, among other things, not only allows but encourages corporations to move their factories out of the country to third world countries where they can establish them as sweatshops, pay people 15 cents a day, put them in hellacious working conditions with no concern for worker safety, no need to worry about worker compensation for injuries sustained on a job, no worry about an 8-hour workday, no worry about a 40-hour work week, no worry about overtime pay, no worry about anybody going on strike because they're living in poverty, and 15 cents a day can buy them at least a meal. Whereas in the United States, it would be a pittance. So basically what they're doing is they're exploiting these other people even more mercilessly than people in the United States who live in right-to-work states get exploited. At least in the United States, there are some regulations and laws. Again, when these people move their factories overseas, they don't have to worry about environmental regulations either, so they can dump all kinds of toxic sludge into the water and the soil and pump it into the atmosphere without any fear of even a slap on the wrist like a carbon tax, which is by no means a solution to the problem of pollution or global warming or anything of the sort. Anyway. The problem with how it is incompatible or inconsistent with neoconservatism is relatively simple to see. Neoconservatism as a foreign policy believes that the way to resolve any kind of economic crisis like a recession or a depression is to get involved in a war or start a military action or something. So this is why we've been in war consistently for quite some time. But the problem with this is the only way that war would help to end an economic recession or depression would be by putting people back to work. When people talk about how great the economy is doing, they're talking about gross domestic product and how well Wall Street is performing. Wall Street doesn't mean jack shit for the average person. It means only something for the people with enough money to invest, and invest big. A better measure of how the economy is performing would be GDI, which is, what's it called? GPI, what is it? Genuine Progress Indicator. So with GPI, what you do is you see how the people as a whole are progressing, how they're doing, how they're able to deal with crises like, you know, a hospitalization, need to go to the emergency room, any of these sort of things. If you have a job that you need to go on the strike for, can you afford to do it? You know, or do you have to keep working in spite of the fact that your working conditions are shit and you're getting paid shit because you can't afford not to keep working? All this kind of stuff, you know. How well are the people doing, not how well are the top 1% doing? But the problem with this is that when neoliberalism has not only allowed but encouraged these people, these corporatists and industrialists, to move their factories into other countries, that means that those factories aren't here anymore. And the way that war or military spending has in the past improved the economy, or, you know, stopped a recession or depression, or contributed to stopping a depression, was because it would put the people back to work in the military-industrial complex. People would be hired to work in these factories to make arms and ammunition and so forth, airplanes and jeeps and tanks and whatever. But when the factories are moved out of the country, people don't get put back to work. And in fact, nobody's going to get put back to work because we've been in a constant state of war, whether declared or otherwise, since at least, you know, the invasion of Afghanistan. So it's not like anybody's going to go back to work because we're already in that kind of military-industrial trap. But on top of that, the whole thing is that they're not just similar, they are the same people espousing both of these things. They just don't understand that they're not going to work. The neoconservative model is no longer going to get us out of an economic depression if we should crash into one, because what I just said, even in World War II was not alone sufficient to get us out of the Great Depression. There were several things that were factors in getting us out of the Great Depression, just as there were several factors involved in the causes of the Great Depression. Among those causes were the economic laissez-faire attitude, deregulation, anti-labor policies and laws, the so-called rugged individualism of Hooverism, the bubble economies, risky lending by banks, just on and on and on, the same kind of shit we've seen ever since 1981, when increasingly since 1981 when Reagan became president, because every American administration from that point forward has pursued the same sort of neoliberal economic policies. Now, George Bush the Elder did try to do otherwise, supposedly, at first, and then couldn't because the economy was messed up enough already by that time. For example, he was not going to raise taxes on the working class, and then went ahead and did so because there had been too many tax breaks given to the wealthy. That's another feature of what happened under Harding and Coolidge and Hoover in the 20s, which was a factor. The thing also was they had a hard money situation at the time, even though we had a fiat currency that had been established when the Federal Reserve Board was established in 1913, if I'm remembering correctly. Even though we already had a fiat currency system, they were still treating it as if it had to be backed by gold. So a hard money situation means a deflated currency. That is to say, every dollar is backed by a certain amount of gold, and they hold the dollar to that particular amount of gold. That means that there can only be a certain amount of dollars in circulation at any given time. Because if you then inflate the currency, it becomes worth less, not worthless, but worth less, because it's backed by gold, and each dollar has to be backed by gold, and there's only so much gold in Fort Knox, and blah, blah, blah. That's no longer the case. We don't have a commodity-backed currency anymore, and we haven't since the beginning of FDR's time in the White House. So what we have now is a fiat currency in actual fact. That is, it's backed by nothing other than the fiat of the government. The government says, this is a dollar, here it is. And the only reason that people impute any value to it is because it can be used to buy and sell stuff. And the reason that it's agreed upon by the society as a means, as a medium of exchange, is because, number one, the government says this is our medium of exchange, and number two, the government says this is what you have to pay us taxes in. So taxation is not actually necessary anymore with a fiat currency. The government does not have to tax you. The government does not have to borrow money from anybody. Who do they borrow money from? Who do they pay money back to? International financiers? Why would they borrow money when they create money? The government creates money. That's what a fiat currency is. Money comes into existence when the government spends it into existence. This is ordered by the United States Congress. Deficit spending is not a problem. The ideas of Reagan and his gang of devotees that deficits have to be brought under control, this is nonsense. There's no reason to be worried about a deficit because the government can simply print money or mint money. Now, it can't do it, like constantly, to pay for everything. It's like money doesn't grow on trees, yeah. But at the same time, they're making far too much out of the deficit. I know we got recently. I may even have this in my list of stories to talk about this evening. So let me just go on and go to the next story. So this next story comes to me from the New York Post. It's written by Joe Tacopino from September 28th. It's a little older story, but it says, Trump administration demands Facebook info on anti-Trump activists. So the Trump administration reportedly has obtained search warrants that would allow them access to the Facebook pages of thousands of anti-Trump protesters. The requested data, which targets all the information in 3 accounts, would include information on about 6,000 individuals who liked an anti-Donald Trump Facebook page, according to CNN. Now, I did talk about this in one of the recent streams where Facebook had, if I recall correctly, won a case in court so that they don't have to comply with this, with these warrants. But this is where the story comes from. This is where it all got started. The ACLU fought the warrant, claimed that it sought information not relevant to the federal probe, and it goes on and so forth. But in case anyone wants to read the original information about where this came from, this was the article I was able to find about it. And I guess I can go ahead and include a link to the other article which talks about how it was rejected by the court so that Facebook doesn't have to comply. So the next article that I have is this is from the Houston Chronicle. It's by Paul Takahashi. Published on the 15th of October. American retail icon Sears files bankruptcy. So, Sears, an icon of American retail for more than a century, filed for bankruptcy protection early Monday morning, the latest casualty of the headwinds facing brick-and-mortar retailers. The embattled department store chain, once the world's largest, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in federal court in New York as it faced a $134 million debt payment Monday. The Hoffman, Illinois-based company, which has $11.3 billion of debt, plans to shutter 142 stores through bankruptcy proceedings, but will keep its remaining stores open through the holidays. None of the most recent closures are in the Houston area. So over the last several years, let me see here. I've got an issue with what I'm trying to read here. Yeah, there's a little thing in the way. It's not letting me see what I what I would like to read to you. So let me open the original article, because I usually save these as PDF so that I've got them and don't have to worry with opening a web page in order to read them. Yeah, so over the last, let's see, Eddie Lampert, chairman and primary shareholder of Sears Holdings, said in a statement, quote, "Over the last several years, we have worked hard to transform our business and unlock the value of our assets. While we have made progress, the plan has yet to deliver the results. Has yet to, Jesus Christ, where the fuck did it go now? Yeah. Bear with me just one moment whilst I stop this video that's trying to load. This is why I make PDFs out of these, so I don't have to wait for shit to load and don't have to worry about ads getting in the way. Okay, so, I mean, I've already opened your goddamn page once, and I've seen all your ads, and I've seen your video, and thanks, but I don't want to see it again. So to continue with chairman and primary shareholder of Sears Holdings, Eddie Lampert, said, quote, "Over the last several years, we have worked hard to transform our business and unlock the value of our assets. While we have made progress, the plan has yet to deliver the results we have desired, and addressing the company's immediate liquidity needs has impacted our efforts to become a profitable and more competitive retailer. The Chapter 11 process will give Holdings the flexibility to strengthen its balance sheet, enabling the company to accelerate its strategic transformation, continue right-sizing its operating model, and return to profitability," end quote. Sears represents the latest and perhaps the most storied brick-and-mortar retailer to fall victim to the rise of big box and e-commerce competitors. The 125-year-old company, which survived the Great Depression and 2 World Wars, joins Toys R Us, Gymboree, Payless Shoe Source, and Rue 21 in declaring bankruptcy in recent years. Houston-based mattress firm, the nation's largest mattress retailer, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy excuse me, earlier this month. Sears' long-rumored bankruptcy filing did not surprise retail analysts. Now, I turned all these fucking notifications off. Why are they back? Sears has failed to turn a profit for 7 straight years and has lost more than $24 billion in market value since 2007. Its stock ended Friday at 41 cents, down from its April 2007 peak of $131.21. Ed Wolf, CEO and founder of Houston-based commercial real estate firm Wolf & Company, said, quote, "It's sad to see Sears go, but times have changed and they didn't change with the times," end quote. Sears lined up $300 million in debtor-in-possession financing from its lenders Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup, which will help pay down debt and keep the retailer operating through the bankruptcy proceedings. To stay afloat, Sears sold most of its top real estate, shuttering nearly 400 stores over the past year alone. Locally, Sears has closed stores at Baybrook Mall, Green, blah, 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 blah. Memorial City, its longtime location in Midtown San Jacinto Mall, the Woodlands Mall, West Oak Mall, and Westwood Mall. 7 Sears stores remain in the Houston area: Willowbrook Mall, North Shepherd, Deerbrook Mall, Plaza Paseo Mall in Pasadena, Mall of the Mainland in Texas City, Parkdale Mall in Beaumont, and Central Mall in Port Arthur. And I don't see Alameda Mall mentioned, which is where we used to go to Alameda Mall quite a lot when I lived in Houston. Nationally, the company operates some 700 Sears and Kmart stores, down from its peak of more than 3,800 locations. The company employs about 70,000 workers. Lampert's hedge fund, ESL Investments, is currently in discussion with Sears to acquire a large portion of the company's stores. Sears also is expected to sell some of its nearly $7 billion in assets over the coming months. Lampert earlier offered to purchase Sears' Kenmore appliance brand for $400 million. Lampert stepped down as CEO as of Monday, but remains chairman of the board at Sears. The retailer created a so-called Office of the CEO composed of a number of Sears executives to manage the company's day-to-day operations. Sears also appointed Mohsin Megji, managing partner of M3 Partners, as its new chief restructuring officer, and William Transfer, CEO of Transfer Advisors, as an independent board member. Both Megji and Transfer have extensive turnaround and restructuring experience. The retailer hired Wild Goetschel and Menges as its legal counsel, M3 Partners and its restructuring advisor, DLA Piper, as its real estate advisor, and Lazard, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, this goes on for, quite a bit more. I'm not going to read the entire thing because, well, the point is, there are a couple of reasons Sears is in trouble. And they're not quite as simple as Sears didn't change with the times. One of them is, yes, e-commerce, things like Amazon and eBay and the like. Yes, those are actual concerns. Those are real. Those are certainly things about how times have changed, and Sears didn't change with them. But Sears was very successful when I was growing up because they had catalogs. They would, you could go to the Sears store, you could pick up a catalog. Sometimes you could get them delivered to your house. I remember getting Sears catalogs in the mail. These are thick books, like the size of phone books, right? They were full of all kinds of... The Sears Wish Book was a thing that would come out before Christmas every year. So all the kids got to see what the hottest new items were going to be from Mattel and whatever else, other kind of toy companies. I don't remember now, Hasbro, Tonka, whatever, all these various toy companies and so forth. And of course, every kid would like, Mommy, I want this for Christmas, I want this for Christmas, I want that for Christmas. And so, if your parents could afford it, then they would, place an order, and it would be delivered to your local Sears store where they could go and pick it up and then bring it home. So, I haven't seen a Sears catalog in years and years. So the idea that they needed to go change completely isn't really quite accurate. I do think they could have transferred from print catalogs to online catalogs, and then still had the products delivered to the local stores where they could be picked up by, shoppers and the like. That would have worked out rather well, and I think that would have been at least a partial solution to the changing of the times. But the point is, yes, they were a very At one point in time, they were a rather progressive business model because of these catalogs that they would have available for pickup at the store that you could subscribe to and have delivered to your home. And then you could go through them and pick out, all sorts of things: clothing, footwear, lingerie, negligee, nightgowns, pajamas, toys, appliances, hand tools, all kinds of things that they had available in the catalogs. There was, at one point in time in the early 60s, you could even get top name musical instruments like Gibson guitars that would have the name Gibson removed, and it would be replaced with the name Airline. So I do, for example, have a vintage 1963 semi-hollow body Gibson with the name Airline placed on it because it was acquired through Sears. It was my father's guitar for a long time, and then it passed into my ownership at some point in time, I guess when I was in college, after I had actually started teaching myself to play guitar on the acoustic guitar he had bought me years and years ago, which I'd never really done anything with until I got to college and I took an interest in heavy metal and the blues and started teaching myself to play. Yeah, so I acquired his Gibson/Airline guitar, and by this point in time he already had a Gretsch Blackhawk, which is what I really wanted, because that's the guitar that you see so often associated with George Harrison. Well, George Harrison had gotten the guitar because Chet Atkins played it, and Chet Atkins, in George Harrison's opinion, was the best guitarist ever. Well, my dad was a Chet Atkins fan too, which is why he had bought that guitar. Well, now I have that guitar, but unfortunately, as he grew older, he became a little careless, and he was still playing occasionally, playing gigs. And so the guitar is a bit damaged now, unfortunately. It would probably cost quite a bit to have it restored, and I would like to have that done just because, it's the guitar that George Harrison made famous with the Beatles. But of course, it's not the only guitar that George Harrison played in the Beatles. He's played Fender Telecaster. He played. I think he had an S&G at one point in time, and I'm reasonably certain that he had a Rickenbacker. I know that John Lennon had a Rickenbacker. Anyway. So, the point that I'm making is that Sears had a very interesting and successful business model for a long time, and I don't think that everything can be blamed entirely on their not changing with the times, because a lot of what I've seen in news about Sears over the past few years has suggested that the person who was in charge of the company was not really managing it very well. I don't know if that was were the same person as this Lampert fellow, who is no longer the CEO but is nevertheless still somehow the chief executive or whatever they said. But it does seem interesting that he's got the money to offer to buy the Kenmore brand after he's sat on top of this company all this while and basically bankrupted it. Yeah, isn't that interesting? So, yeah, I don't know if that was him, if that were him or not, but someone at Sears who was running the show wasn't doing a very good job, according to the information I've seen. Anyway, so I'm going to go on a little bit more here. So I have another article here. This looks like good news. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a drink here of this Pepsi. I finally closed the window in the bedroom earlier today, since it's probably not going to be hot enough anymore for a while. But yeah, I had the vent thing, the exhaust from the air conditioner going out that window. And, and there was a gap, a little bit of a gap, and it wasn't very well insulated. So I just took the vent panel out of the window and closed the window. So I might be having a little bit of, I don't know, some kind of reaction to that. I seem a little bit stuffy. I know I don't have a cold because I haven't been anywhere to get a cold. Or the flu or anything like that. This is probably some kind of allergic reaction to dust in the house or the like. Anyway, so I have another article here from Zero Hedge. Now, of course, it's by Tyler Durden, and that could be anybody because there are apparently 4 or 5 different people who write for this, and they all call themselves Tyler Durden, and they attribute their articles to the same Tyler Durden, who's an imaginary person. But anyway, this was published on Monday, the 15th of October, and the title is Ecuador Restores Julian Assange's Internet, Phone, and Visitation Privileges. Yay, but wait. Ecuador has partially restored Julian Assange's communications in their London embassy after UN officials met with Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno on Friday, reports the Belfast Telegraph. Assange, who has lived in the embassy for over 6 years, had his phone and internet access taken away in March over political statements he made in violation of, quote, a written commitment made to the government at the end of 2017 to not issue messages that might interfere with other states, end quote. His visitor access was also limited to members of his legal team. So it goes on. It talks about this for some time. WikiLeaks said in a statement, quote, Ecuador has told WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange that it will remove the isolation regime imposed on him following meetings between 2 senior UN officials and Ecuador, end quote. This goes on a little bit longer. I'm not going to read any more of it because, in fact, since this article was published, tweets from the WikiLeaks account on Twitter have given the indication that this hasn't actually been done to the satisfaction of Mr. Assange or the WikiLeaks publication. That his lawyer was supposed to meet with him earlier this week and was denied access. So who knows what's really going on there? Is this just a PR stunt by Ecuador to make it seem like they're going to let Assange back on the internet and so forth, or what? And I don't know the answer to that. So we will have to stay tuned and find out what develops. So then I have yet another article here. Oh, I don't seem to have this article saved as a PDF yet. So let me pull it out and look at it. Give me a moment while it loads. It should be relatively quick. This is from Wired. And it is great. So even though I've already looked at this article this month, it tells me that it's counting it against me as to the number that I can look at in a month. So I've got 1 article left free this month. Great. Well, you know what? I may actually do have this. Let me look and see again. Yes, I do. Well, fuck me, huh? Okay. Alright, so this is from Wired. Shit. And it says, Amazon's Jeff Bezos says tech companies should work with the Pentagon. This is also published on the 15th of October. It is by Natasha Tiku, and it says Amazon's Jeff Bezos says tech companies should work with the Pentagon. He said Monday, defending government contracts amid a wave of employee protests, quote, "If big tech companies are going to turn their back on U.S. Department of Defense, this country is going to be in trouble," end quote. Bezos spoke at the Wired 25 summit, where Stephen Levy, Wired editor-at-large, asked his view of companies using the most advanced technology to aid the DoD. Bezos replied, quote, "We are going to continue to support the DoD, and I think we should," end quote. The Amazon founder seemed baffled by the wave of employee dissent that has torn through tech companies over the ethical implications of government contracts. Last week, for example, Google said it would not bid for a Pentagon cloud computing contract called Joint Enterprise Defense Initiative, or JEDI. Google earlier said it would not renew its contract on Project Maven. Bezos said of tech companies pulling back from government work, quote, "It doesn't make any sense to me. One of the jobs of the senior leadership team is to make the right decision, even when it's unpopular," end quote. Bezos' eagerness to cooperate with the Pentagon seemed to stem from his desire to keep America safe. He said, quote, "I like this country. I know everybody is very conflicted about the current politics and so on, but this country is a gem," end quote. During his defense of defense work, Bezos also grazed past the topic of immigration. Quote, "There aren't other countries where everybody is trying to get in. I'd let them in if it were me. I like them. I want all of them in. But this is a great country and it does need to be defended," end quote. Bezos said he remains optimistic about technology, arguing that the potential for harm should not stop progress because humans are resilient. Quote, "The reason that we have pulled ourselves up as a species by our bootstraps is because we have continued to make technological progress. Technologies always are two-sided. There are ways they can be misused," end quote, he said. As an example, Bezos pointed to the printing press, and he said, quote, "The book was invented and people could write really evil books and lead bad revolutions with them and create fascist empires with books. That doesn't mean the book is bad," end quote. He continued, pointing to social media, which he said increases identity politics and tribalism, quote, "I feel that society develops an immune response eventually to the bad uses of new technology, but it takes time. The internet in its current incarnation is a confirmation bias machine. You have a going-in point of view. You go do some searches, you find confirmation of your point of view," end quote. Along with increased tribalism, Bezos said, quote, "I worry that some of these technologies will be very useful for autocratic regimes to enforce their goal," end quote. But ultimately, he returned to the theme of human resilience. Quote, "That's always been the case, and we will figure it out. The last thing I'd ever want to do is stop the progress of new technologies, even when they are dual use," end quote. The Amazon CEO's embrace of automation and efficiency extends to his space company, Blue Origin. Blue Origin expects to send people into suborbital space by next year. Levy, who toured the company's operations, said on stage that he was surprised no Blue Origin employees will be on board. Levy said, quote, "There's no flight attendants. I'm going to go out into space without anyone to tell me maybe it's time to sit down in your chair and stop bouncing around," end quote. Bezos nodded, quote, "That's right. There are 6 seats and they're all going to be for paying astronauts," end quote. Levy said, quote, "I love that you call them astronauts because you said they're going to have maybe a day or two of training," end quote. Bezos replied, quote, "Yeah, they'll have a day or two of training. I'm pushing for a day," end quote. So, I mean, as anyone who has kept up with my work for any length of time knows, Jeff Bezos does have a $600 million contract with the Central Intelligence Agency. Exactly what the nature of that is, I'm not sure. He owns the Washington Post, which, as I have said several times, is essentially a
He's got a seat on the Pentagon or DOD, forget which one.
Yeah, hi, baby.
It's about time.
I knew you were here. I just didn't. You didn't say anything, so and I'm trying to get through all of these articles. So
I was making snarky comments from before.
I didn't hear anything. You didn't say a word. I did hear some noises that you were making, though, more recently. I mean, you were here for a while before I heard anything coming out of your mic.
I was snarking about the Ecuador thing with Julian Assange.
Well, I didn't hear you say anything about any of that. Very curious. So, let's see. I may have this one. I'm not sure. I hope I have this one. Yes, I do. This is from the New York Times, or as I sometimes say, the New York Times, by Emily Baumgartner. Viruses spread by insects to crops sound scary. Really? Do they really sound scary? I would think they wouldn't sound scary. Viruses spread by insects to crops sound scary. The military calls it food security. Critics warn that a Defense Department-funded food security project that is still in the lab could set off a, quote, biological arms race, end quote. So there's a photo of a locust, a grasshopper, on a blade of corn. Here. This is a yellow grasshopper or locust, and it's really quite interesting looking. Within the Defense Department, one agency's recent project sounds futuristic. Millions of insects carrying viruses descend upon crops and then genetically modify them to withstand droughts, floods, and foreign attacks, ensuring a permanently secure food supply. But in a warning published Thursday in the journal Science, a group of independent scientists and lawyers objected to the research, which has not yet moved out of the lab. They argue that the endeavor is not so different from designing biological weapons banned under international law since 1975 that could swarm and destroy acres of crops. The dispute is the latest episode in an ongoing international debate over the pursuit of what is called dual-use research, technological discoveries that can be beneficial or pose threats to human welfare. What? I think we were just hearing that James Bond villain. What's his name? Is that guy's name again? Oh, yes, Jeff Bezos. I think we were just hearing that James Bond villain talk about dual-use technology. So, as gene editing tools become increasingly accessible, scientists, ethicists, and policymakers are weighing the good pivotal discoveries could do for humanity against their nefarious potential. Guy Reeves, a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Biology in Germany who contributed to the critique, said, quote, once you engineer a virus that spreads by insect, it is hard to imagine how you would ever control it. You haven't just released a transmissible virus, you've released a disease. The United States knows better than to return to a biological arms race, end quote. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, which funds the research, responded to the critique with their own published rebuttal on Thursday. Quote, With any of these new technologies that are going to be revolutionary, there's some inherent dual-use potential there. What we've done in this program is be very open, end quote, said Blake Beckstein, the research program's manager, in an interview. DARPA launched the Insect Allies research, and this is actually the name, Insect Allies, both capital IA, Insect Allies. Yeah, interesting, IA. Isn't that like AI reversed? Artificial intelligence. DARPA launched the Insect Allies research program in 2016, budgeting $45 million over 4 years to transform agricultural pests into vectors that can transfer proactive genes into plants within one growing season. That would be exponentially faster than modifying crops through a gene drive, which would breed specific traits into a species over several generations. Gene drives have been proposed to reduce mosquito fertility, halting diseases like malaria. Researchers at 4 institutions, Boyce Thompson Institute in New York, Ohio State University, Pennsylvania State University, and the University of Texas, Austin, have since been experimenting with the targeted gene therapy they hope will help farmers face issues like frost and disease. But the critics said publishing the new research findings could establish, quote, preliminary instruction manuals, end quote, for developing offensive biological weapons. Beyond strengthening crops' resilience, insects could be easily engineered to carry viruses that destroy plants, Dr. Reeves said. He added that one of the main species targeted in the research is maize, a staple source of nutrition for hundreds of millions of people in Latin America and Africa. Foreign military programs are often, quote, driven by perception of competitors' activities. The mere announcement of this program may motivate other countries to develop their own capabilities in this arena. Indeed, it may have already done so, end quote, the critics warned. The scholars suggested enhancing pre-existing methods of crop protection, such as aerial spraying, but DARPA program executives considered those tools expensive and imprecise. They also said the critique mischaracterized their research by suggesting that these viruses would permanently modify a plant's genome. That is not the case, Dr. Beckstein said. Quote, if you see a drought coming, you can deploy the system to sustain a period of difficulty and then go back to a natural state. We are developing tools that are futuristic, but they are based very much in reality. This is biology we understand very well, end quote. DARPA has included the Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, and other regulators throughout the project. It also requires researchers to include at least 3 kill switches or emergency brakes in their systems as a safety measure. Dr. Reeves was not satisfied. He said, quote, I think this project was decided down one quiet corridor, an agency with intentionally little oversight that comes up with slightly crazy ideas, and top people in the Pentagon will be as shocked as I was, end quote. DARPA officers conceded that their agency's work often involves calculated risk. Still, they consider it core to their mission to consider the benefits. Dr. Beckstein said, quote, we're glad people are asking questions, but food security is national security. It stabilizes our society, end quote. So, so, I mean, if this were ever actually done, if this were put into actual practice, then there would be no point in fighting for labeling products as GMO or non-GMO anymore, because there'd be no way to be certain without doing a lab test on those food products. I mean, if these insects can be made into carriers for a virus that will transform ordinary plants into GMO plants, What's going to stop them from turning all the plants in the world into GMO plants? It's just, I don't know. I'm very concerned about this as well. I mean, you know, GMOs are not inherently bad. They have certainly brought benefits, but I do think that there is a need for the precautionary principle to be applied here as well. This is a scientific principle, which, you know, scientists, sane scientists instead of mad scientists, have embraced and advocated for a long time. So, I mean, certainly there was a type of GMO some years back that could have done significant damage to the entire world's food supply, but it was fortunately stopped before it got out of hand. I do have an article on that somewhere. I will include that in the video description, a link to that article. I don't remember now exactly where it's from, but I do know that I have it in a particular blog post I wrote back in 2016. So the next article that I have, I believe this is one that you gave me, baby. It's from Willamette Week. Portland mayor proposes emergency rules to keep warring protest groups from beating people in the streets. Far-right and so-called fringe-left protesters have been brawling for nearly 2 years in Portland. Yes, they have. The very night of the general election, as soon as it was obvious that Hillary was going to lose, these people lost their shit. Now, you can talk about this, baby, because you know it. You were there, and I wasn't. But, like, there was... They went around Portland and Portland and the entire what is the name of the county there? I've forgotten.
Multnomah.
Yeah, Multnomah County. Portland and Multnomah County overwhelmingly went for Hillary, and yet these what should I call them? Malcontents decided that they were going to trash the city in response to Hillary having lost the election.
Trash the city, try and set a police car on fire.
Yes, setting cars on fire, smashing windows.
That one.
Smashing windows, beating the hell out of trash cans. All of that shit started that night in Portland. And why? Why? Honestly, why? Because Hillary lost?
Some comments I read on Reddit. Antifa is protecting our minorities from the evil right-wing fascist Nazis.
Yeah. Supposedly, these are leftists. Fringe left, far left. Let me explain something to everybody who might accidentally come upon this live stream or might be listening now at the moment. Anybody who supported Hillary Clinton for president is not a leftist, period. End of. Nothing further needs to be said. I can go into great detail about this, but I've talked about this incessantly on my channel. There's a video, the first video I did on postmodern outrage mongers, for example, goes into some detail about how the Democratic Party is not a fucking leftist party. And I've talked about it earlier in this stream as well. The Democrats are not leftist. Get that fucking notion out of your head. Stop calling these freaks far left. They're not far left. They're outrage mongers. That's it. That's all they are. They are either progressives, Democratic Party loyalists, or they're regressives. They're not progressive. They're not leftist. There's nothing socialist about it. They're fucking idiots. That's what they are. They're people who think that violence is a way to win an argument over political disagreement. It's not. In fact, resorting to violence as an attempt to win an argument, no, this is wrong on so many levels. First of which is you don't win arguments. An argument is a set of statements, some of which called premises are given in support of another called the conclusion. There is no winner or loser of an argument. An argument is either valid or invalid. That has to do with the form of the argument, which means, does it follow the rules of inference? Does the conclusion follow from the premises by means of the rules of inference? And does it do so correctly? Were there any formal fallacies involved? Because if there were, then it's invalid, formally invalid. Also, an argument is either sound or unsound. That means that if the premises of the argument are true and the form of the argument is valid, then the conclusion must be true. That's the very definition of proof, and you can't get that from anything except mathematics and deductive logic. You can't get proof from science. You can get disproof. You can disprove a universal assertion or universal denial by means of the scientific method, which is inductive logic. But apart from that, no. You can't prove. You can only give strong support because there are always variable...
So, are we ever going to talk about the article?
Yes, we will. There are always variable factors that have not been considered or may not have been considered. There are always things that you haven't taken into consideration that may or may not be relevant factors. And I mean, this is why science continues to grow and evolve over time. And we learn more.
Like you going off on massive side tangents.
Yes. I can do that. It's a live stream. There's no plan here except for me to read news and comment on it. So I'm commenting. But anyway, you don't win an argument, is the point that I'm making. Arguments are not won or lost. Debates are won or lost. Debates are not logic. Debates are not arguments. Debates are rhetoric. An argument is a case for a conclusion. That's all it is. You present your argument, boom. That's your argument. It's not an argument that you're having with someone else. That's not what argument means in the technical sense of the term. But not only can you not win or lose an argument, resorting to violence is a type of informal fallacy known as argumentum ad baculum, which means appeal to the stick or appeal to the baton. It's where you take out your stick and you bash the other person over the head, or you threaten them with violence or something like that if they don't concede your point. That's not how you argue. That is not logic. That is not anything except being a punk-ass dumb fuck. You don't win arguments, and you certainly don't do it by means of resorting to fallacy. Anyway, so the article here from Willamette Week. This is from the, what's the date on this? Oh shit, it doesn't tell me. It should tell me, but I don't see a date on it. Oh, the 15th. Yes, so many of these things are from the 15th. I don't know why. This is by Katie Shepard, and it's called Portland Mayor Proposes Emergency Rules to Keep Warring Protest Groups from Beating People in the Streets. The subtitle is Far-Right and Fringe-Left Protesters Have Been Brawling for Nearly 2 Years in Portland. And again, I'm going to take exception to the term fringe-left in reference to these Antifa, BAM, and Black Bloc punk asses, because they're not leftists. So the article says, Mayor Ted Wheeler proposed an emergency ordinance Monday afternoon that will allow Portland police to separate dueling protest groups that have turned the streets of downtown Portland into battlegrounds. The new rules will allow officers to require protesters with a history of violence to gather in designated areas where police will have an easier time keeping adversaries separated. Wheeler said at a press conference this afternoon, Monday, I guess, afternoon, quote, I will not allow continued planned street violence between rival factions to take place in Portland, Oregon. I have also asked my staff to evaluate options to hold accountable those who recklessly drain our public safety resources by using our city as a venue for planned street violence, end quote. Wheeler says City Council will likely vote on the ordinance this week. The change comes on the heels of a melee outside Kelly's Olympian Bar on October the 13th, where the right-wing groups Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys brawled with anti-fascists. Police faced renewed scrutiny for failing to keep the two groups apart and making no arrests during the mayhem. This weekend's brawl mirrored a riot on June the 30th that left one man in the hospital with a brain hemorrhage. Today, Wheeler said that prior to an August 4th rally, the Portland Police Bureau discovered right-wing protesters who had positioned themselves on the roof of a building with a cache of firearms. What began in the spring of 2017 as improvised confrontations in downtown parks, usually marked by insults and culminating in a punch or two, has grown into chaotic rolling brawls that rage the length of a city block. Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys have made Portland their primary destination for antagonizing masked anti-fascists. Antifa has often taken the bait, throwing punches and deploying bear spray on helmeted right-wingers who use flagpoles as weapons. The fights, which often pit one unlucky person against half a dozen adversaries, are bloody beatings drawing national scorn. Portland city officials say they cannot stop right-wing groups like Patriot Prayer from demonstrating, even though their rallies often devolve into violence. They point to First Amendment protections established by federal courts that do not allow prior violence to be the basis of banning a protest. Instead, police will use the city's new ordinance to keep warring protesters far enough apart that people cannot exchange blows. And a correction has been issued to the article that says this post has been changed to make clear that the city council still must vote on the ordinance. The date the guns were found has been corrected. So let's see. I don't see, it was updated on the 16th, so the very next day. So I don't, supposedly this was going to be voted on this week. Do you know if they voted on it and what the outcome was?
I don't bloody remember. I don't think they even voted.
Oh, well, that's just lovely, huh? Well, joy, joy, joy. Let me go ahead and, I'm afraid I'm going to actually have to take an antihistamine because my sinuses are all stopped up and my throat is beginning to bother me as well. It's rained all day here, or most of the day, and of course, you remember I thought that that particular company was going to deliver my package today, which is now a week and a day late. No, they didn't come today, and instead, it still says that they're waiting for directions to my house. See, this is what I've told people. I'm not worried about being doxxed because assuming anyone could actually find any information about me on the internet, one, they would find an old address where I no longer live, and two, even if they could somehow find this address, good luck finding the house, even with GPS. FedEx can't find the house. So and it's not like they weren't here less than a month ago to deliver a previous package, but hell. Yeah. So anyway, they didn't come again today. So I'm going to have, it says that they're going to deliver it tomorrow. I doubt they will. And I'm pretty sure the reason why they didn't deliver it today is because it was raining and they're, afraid to get on a dirt road while it's raining. And I'm like, it's not really a dirt road. It's paved part of the way, and then it turns into dirt and gravel. You're probably not going to get stuck out here unless you come in like, the snow or something. Yeah, oh well. So I guess I've got to call them yet again. This will be like the third or fourth time I've called them. They have my phone number. I told them if they have any trouble finding the house to give me a fucking call, and I would come out in the road and stand there so that they could see me. But yeah, no cooperation. We're not going to deliver it. We just don't fucking feel like coming down there. We're going to wait until we've got 15 other packages to come down there, and then we'll come down there. Yeah, that's probably what it really is. Anyway. Well, so I can look into that later. If you're not looking into it now, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, to find out if that was in fact voted on and what the results were. So let's see. I'm not gonna. I don't think. Well, maybe I will. Okay. Yeah, I will. So, this next article comes from the Sun Sentinel, and it is dated, that's the South Florida Sun Sentinel, and it is dated October the 15th, again, yay. And the title of this is by Dan Sweeney, contact reporter for the South Florida Sun Sentinel. So the title of the article is Kelsey Grammer is the latest face of the campaign to pass a victims' rights constitutional amendment. Now, before anyone flips out about what this means, victims' rights amendment, let me tell you what the article says, because we're not talking about believe women when they claim to have been raped without any evidence whatsoever. No, no, no. I think we all should have learned Tawana Brawley case that you need to go through due process. Of course, a lot of...
One would think.
Well, a lot of
it's so much easier just to launch accusations and not even bother with that whole due process thing.
A lot of people are in the audience are too young to remember Tawana Brawley or anything about what happened and the subsequent Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas case, which, people, because of Tawana Brawley, were less willing to believe Anita Hill, and so Clarence Thomas was in fact confirmed to be a Supreme Court justice, a decision which has